1865 marked the end of slavery in the United States. After the emancipation of the slaves, the Southern economy plummeted. Southern business owners needed a way to carry on without all of the virtually free labor that they were so accustomed to. The Northerners wanted to bring in industrialization for the South to help with that need. The Southerners weren't too keen on that idea and were still feeling the anger and sting from the loss of the war. So there became segregation and the passing of Jim Crow laws. It seemed that the New South, the Northerners, and the African Americans had hoped for turned out to be not so new after all. Ida B. Wells Barnett was born into slavery. She was educated at Rusk University, which was a freedmen's school that her father helped establish. And at the age of 14, she began teaching in a country school. Using the pen name Iola, Wells in 1891 wrote some newspaper articles that were critical of the education available for African American children. Her teaching contract was not renewed. She then decided to do journalism full time and bought an interest in the Memphis Free Speech. On October 5th, 1892, Ida B. Wells delivered a powerful speech about lynching to a room of prominent African American women in New York City's Lyric Hall. She had spent months investigating the torture and murder of Black Americans in the South. After this speech, a white mob burned down her newspaper office. Wells moved north and joined an intellectual community of Black women, educators, activists, and journalists in Brooklyn and New York City. This groundbreaking speech to those supporters led to the publication of her first book, Southern Horrors, only a few weeks later. And in 1895, she released her second book, A Red Record. She was active in organizing local African American women in various causes, from anti-lynching campaigns to the suffrage movement. She was militant in her demand for justice for African Americans and her insistence that it be won by their own accords. A lot of information that is out there is because of this beautiful human being. The information and the stories that I will be sharing with you today came from her two books. There were lynchings during slavery, but it wasn't as prevalent as it was until after the emancipation, because from every lynching during slavery, the slave owners were losing 100 to 200 for the person themselves, as well as the profit they would make from 25 plus years of the slave's hard work. Lynching became a common practice after the emancipation as a way to induce fear and keep African Americans subservient, which continued to give whites the feeling of superiority that they craved. While these horrendous acts were going on, there were three main reasons that were given. The first being that the whites were trying to stop race riots. It is said that for years immediately after the war, that there was a countless amount of African Americans slaughtered in the South. The Northerners were usually told something along the lines of that African Americans were planning on coming together and rising up and exacting revenge on whites. Only hours later for there to be word sent again to the North that the riot was resisted by the Southern white men, and it resulted in several African Americans killed and wounded, although there was never any white men harmed during such occasions. This reason was told primarily between 1865 and 1872 and this resulted in hundreds of African American men and women killed mercilessly. The second prominent reason, and this took place after the Constitution was amended and African Americans were given the right to vote. This is absolutely enraged the white men of the South who didn't believe that African American people should have any of the same rights as them, especially a say in the government. African American men were lynched for even trying to exercise their right to vote. Another thing that goes along with this is that white Southerners didn't like for African Americans to be more successful than they were. They'd be lynched for being successful, and their families would either be lynched as well or ran out of town. Then their businesses would be taken over by a white Southern man. The third, and I think the most prominent reason of all, was to protect the virtue of the white Southern woman. African American men were lynched for being in consensual relationships with white women. Instead of it being called consensual, they'd say that they raped them. Women would also have affairs and would blame it on a black man raping them. There were a lot of men that were lynched when they had never even been involved with a white woman. The lynching of Thomas Smith is perhaps the most infamous in Southwest Virginia. It happened in Roanoke in September of 1893. Thomas Smith was arrested and charged with beating and robbing a white woman. Mayor Henry S. Trout ordered the entire police force and members of a local militia to protect the jail. A mob formed and was initially disbanded. During a second attack on the jail, however, the authorities opened fire, killing 8 and injuring a few dozen others, including the mayor himself, who was shot in the foot. The mob, which numbered between 1,500 and 4,000, still managed to capture Smith. Some historians suggested the local police helped. They lynched him and put a sign on him that read Mayor Trout's friend. Then they burned his body. The mob later clamored for pieces of Smith's clothing and or the tree that he died on. They did this all in front of his 15-year-old little sister. White Southerners would do that. They would take body parts. They would take pictures and sell them as postcards. It was absolutely horrendous. This is Henry Smith. The crime he committed was that he did, in fact, strangle a 4-year-old little girl named Myrtle Vance, who was the daughter of a local policeman. And it is said that he did this because he was rumored to be mentally handicapped, and her father had arrested him sometime before and mercilessly beat him. And so they thought that he did this to get back at the father. Though the newspaper published that that Mr. Smith sexually assaulted her and literally tore her limb from limb, which was far from the truth. Smith tried to run, but was caught and brought back. And on the way back, his captors told him that he was going to be tortured and burned. And he begged and pleaded for them to just shoot him. When he arrived on the 1st of February, 1893, back in Paris, Texas, he arrived to a crowd of 10,000 at his lynching. When a crime was done on a Southern white female, the lynching was usually done by her family members, and that is, in fact, what happened during this lynching. It was done by her father, her 15-year-old brother, and her uncle. They heated irons until they were white hot, and they started from the bottom of his feet and inched up, peeling the skin from his bones until they made their way to his mouth, where they burned his tongue and stuck the irons down his throat and gouged his eyes out with the burning irons. Somehow he was still alive, so they poured kerosene over his body and lit him on fire, and he burned to death. This is Edward Coy. He was lynched February 18th, 1892 in Texarkana, Arkansas. He was charged with the crime of raping a Miss Julia Jewell, a white woman who was married to Henry Jewell. It is said that they had been having an affair for well over a year, and that they attacked him and they strapped him to a tree and chipped the flesh from his body and poured coal oil over him. And they had Miss Julia grab the torch, and it is said that his last words were to Julia, and he asked her if she was really going to burn him after they had been sweethearting all that time. And that's exactly what she did. She set fire to his body. Between 1877 and 1950, the accepted statistic is that around 4,000 African American men, women, and children were lynched. Ida B. Wells said in the Red Record in 1895 that to her knowledge over 10,000 had been lynched. This is a grievous misjustice to the lost souls who were lynched, and in my opinion, just one more way that they are still being shown that they didn't mean anything and are still being treated like they were less than human.